we're very pleased to welcome Vice President of Human Resources Supply Chain at General Mills, Kristina Morton. Hello, Kristina.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks for having me here today.
Thanks for joining us. And kicking us off after a little hiatus, our co-founder and CEO, Dr. David Rock. Hi, David.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks for setting things up, and appreciate all the work you're doing behind the scenes there. And Kristina, it's so great to be here with you. I really appreciated the collaboration and conversations we've had over quite a few years now. I remember we met in Switzerland at one point when you were heading up Europe, and I was over there, and we've met a number of times and working with General Mills. I have to say, first of all, before I say anything about NLI, I have to say a big thank you for helping pretty much the entire planet get back to baking and for keeping those factories open under very difficult conditions, because you guys make so much, so many important ingredients for literally cookies and bread and cakes, and all that amazing baking that happened around the world would have kind of ground to a halt if you guys didn't keep the factories open. So thanks for everything that you did over that time. It must have been quite intense.
Absolutely.
So for those of you new to NLI, I'm not going to say much, but we're actually quite old as a company now, 23 years officially. We've been doing this work, advising over 50 of the Fortune 100, very much global, and we partner with a number of firms like General Mills in every corner of the world, and that's something that we're really specialize in. But at the core of our work is research, and one of the things I say to organizations that work with us in any way is, always start with the science, begin with the science. And in the last few years, I started saying, look, follow the science and then experiment and then follow the data. And it became a bit of a mantra. In fact, I think we're printing t-shirts with this at the moment. Follow the science, experiment, follow the data. And Kristina at General Mills is one of the organizations that took that very much to heart. And actually on learning about the SCARF model in particular, and threat and reward, and the different social domains that are made up in SCARF, actually has done a lot of work to not just educate the organization, but apply this into organizational systems. We talk a lot about priorities, habits, and systems. So General Mills done some really interesting work to bring some of our research into systems. And we met a few months ago, and I heard about literally the experiment that they've done and all this data. I said, oh my gosh, lots of people would love to hear about this. It's really interesting data. So thanks very much, Kristina, for making the time and being willing to share with us the outcome of this study. We'll describe it in a minute. Just for context, we wrote a paper way back in 2016, 5 years ago, called The Neuroscience of Total Rewards. And in this, we dug into how to think about total rewards beyond just financial rewards from a brain perspective. And there are a number of things that really stood out as we researched kind of the concept of designing reward systems. Notice the word systems, right? Reward systems. A number of things stood out. One of them is that rewards are not rewarding unless the brain kind of says this is rewarding. So you can give someone, a big bonus, and it can be rewarding or it can be upsetting. Actually, it depends on a number of factors. And we came to see that the SCARF framework of things like fairness and status, and did I get a fair amount? Did I get more than people that I produce more than? And all this stuff really played in. The other thing that we saw was the enormous impact of autonomy in actually making a reward process powerful. And not just because people actually get to choose the reward that they want, although that's really important. We realized that there was actually 3 points at which the reward was activated in the brain. Like treating someone as an adult and giving them a choice, first of all, was very powerful, and we'll talk more about that. When they actually make the choice, it's rewarding, but then also when they participate in the choice, it feels closer to them as a construal issue, and it activates reward networks even more. Plus, they're more likely to choose something that is actually intrinsically rewarding to their whole personality profile. So there's all these reasons why kind of giving people a lot more choice than we ever have around rewards is really powerful. And even though we're going to talk about rewards, I think this is hugely relevant to much more than just rewards. This is an example of one system where you can apply autonomy. And I thought I wanted to dive deeper into this study, and then we can kind of pull out and think about implications for other systems and all of this. But Kristina, over to you. Do you want to tell us the story of kind of how it came about and and what's going on. Tell us about the project.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David. Well, like many of the things we've been talking about lately, a year ago when the pandemic started, already it was the purpose at General Mills to make food the world loves. But with the pandemic, we actually started adding this and needs to the bottom of our purpose. So making food the world loves and needs, to your point about making sure that we had enough food in being produced for people to be able to eat. And so in our manufacturing organization, we quickly realized we needed to keep people safe because we needed people to show up to make the food, right? It wasn't, our office workers could certainly work from home, but in our manufacturing facilities, you still have to show up to make the food. And so we needed to make people sick, make sure people were safe, while also, by the way, making every case we could, because we knew that probably we were going to sell every case we could make for the foreseeable future. And so the team did some phenomenal work in getting some new safety protocol in place. I know all the food manufacturers were working on this and sharing best practices. We were learning new things almost every day. We were changing protocols, bringing new ones in almost every day. And the teams just did a terrific job of working through that while keeping the cases coming out the door, right? And getting those cases out into the grocery stores and on shelves for consumers. And it was really a point of time at 6 months in when we were able to participate in a benchmarking survey. And we were still realizing probably 400 absences per day, but our industry benchmarking showed us that our absence rate was half that of our industry average. And when we also benchmarked the close contact tracing per confirmed COVID case, we were averaging 0.5 and the industry average was 4. So some really incredible work. We realized that we were doing things really well and we needed to stay on track with that and keep going and keep improving to make sure that we had those safety protocol in place. In the beginning of the pandemic, there was an outpouring of support and appreciation for our frontline, our teamwork, our workers, and folks that were showing up at the plant every day. And the businesses were, we want to send T-shirts, we want to send, we want to make bonuses, and we did, right? And we did send T-shirts, and we did meals and food trucks and General Mills product, of course, and branded masks and grocery vouchers, right? We had to kind of pace it out a bit because we could see we were going to be in this for a while. But that really was the time when we came into that second wave of that October, November timing, that we were sensing and seeing that people were tired. They were working schedules like they hadn't before, under conditions with all these safety protocols like never before. And we started to see this in our engagement data, and we knew we were adding run days into our schedule everywhere we could through holidays, et cetera. So we started to worry about the resilience of our teams. And so, the HR team did some amazing work setting out to conduct fatigue assessments with every single one of our sites here in North America. We used qualitative and quantitative data, and we identified some of our higher risk plants and action plans to help close those gaps where we needed more staffing or resources, et cetera. But we also noticed that some sites were doing just fine, actually, and thriving even in the pandemic. So we dove in a little bit deeper to see what we could learn from those sites, as well as we looked at building the action plans for the others. So we were in this kind of height of the pandemic and seeing higher absenteeism, starting to see some staffing shortages, supplementing with other parts of the organization to get through. And we sat down with leadership to say, hey, here's the themes that we're seeing from this fatigue assessment. We need to talk about what we're going to do. And I just have to say, we have some phenomenal leaders at General Mills. I mean, really, really makes it a pleasure to work in human resources. The company, the leaders of the company truly care about our people. They understand the importance of leadership and culture on performance and success. So it wasn't a hard sell to say we need to talk about this, right? They were quick to engage, but the ideas were, okay, well, let's just do another bonus, right? Let's do some more recognition. Let's give everybody a day off, right? Let's just take all the plants down for a weekend. Can we just take a weekend and pick a weekend and take all the plants down, and really, how can we show them how much we care about their well-being, that we hear them, and that we appreciate them.
And the leaders generated these ideas. The leaders were coming up with this.
Yep.
That's fantastic.
Yep.
Yeah. Can I just make a quick comment? What I'm thinking about as you're talking about this is the 3 stages of the pandemic that we started talking about way back in March, which was, shock, pain, and rehabilitation. And, the shock was like 3 to 6 months maybe of just running on adrenaline. And then at some point the pain kicked in. That's been going on all this time. We're still kind of in that. We're just moving into the rehabilitation phase. Like we're at the beginning of the 3rd phase of rehabilitation. And similar to when you like break a leg, long period of pain and then eventually, rehabilitation. And we're starting to get, so you were trying to help people through that long, dark tea time of the soul of pain.
That's right.
In that way. But it's really interesting to hear the leaders actually generated a lot of these ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're really engaged. And we thought, wow, that would be bold, right? To take all of our plants down for a long weekend, and give people some time off. But then also that would mean we wouldn't make those cases, and we'd never be able to make that up, right? You miss the opportunity, and we were already not meeting our customers' expectations in terms of customer service and delivery. So we, and then we also thought about, fortunately, our manufacturing leaders and our HR team that leads this group, we've all worked in our manufacturing facilities. And so there's also the perspective of that person in your ear that's like, I don't want the weekend off. I don't want the company to choose when I have a weekend off, or, I don't even have my kids this weekend, or I just want to make money, right? This is a great opportunity for me, and I want to work their extra hours and be able to maximize my wealth through this period of time, right? This is the most overtime I've ever been able to take advantage of.
Right.
And we often have this saying, I'm sure everybody who's working with employees, everyone in HR probably says this, but this common experience of no good deed goes unpunished. Right. And so when you try to do something, you have good intent, and inevitably there's someone who points out the error in your thinking and in your ways, right? And how it didn't work for them. And so why does this keep happening to us, right? And so we wanted to avoid that as well. And David, this is kind of where you and your team enter into the conversation, because you had just spoken in November at our top 100 leadership conference with our CEO and our top 100 leaders. And you focused on resilience and SCARF. And in SCARF, you really focused on unexpected autonomy. And we really reflected on like, okay, what is what's going on for our folks if we think about it from that SCARF standpoint, right? And their status is falling, right? As we go through this difficult period, and we transition from, a crisis management to a company running during a crisis, right? And operating during a crisis. And that certainty question, which was still, haunting all of us, of how long is this going to last? Autonomy for sure, where, we did see an increase in what we call forced overtime. So, the way the overtime rotates, usually we get more volunteers, but if no one volunteers, then, some people get stuck with it, if you will, and forced overtime. The relatedness was impacted through the safety protocols, right? So you can't have lunch with your friends or be on break or chat with your buddies at work. It's so much more difficult with masks and 6 feet of distancing and everything else that we had in place to keep people safe ongoing. And then fairness as well. There was a sense that in our manufacturing plants, we added run days in over the 4th of July. We added run days in over Labor Day. We added run days in over Thanksgiving, and then we were adding run days in between Christmas holiday and the New Year's holidays that, were meaning that more people were having to work those holidays, and, the office workers who are working from home didn't have to do that stuff, right? So
asking a lot of people, and there's some unfairness because also the people in the factories are taking a greater risk just before they even get to the factory, just by being in public or public transport or driving. So there's a real gap between the people who have to be in public and not. We were talking about that a lot for the last year. So you've really got the jackpot of kind of negative SCARF on all 5 domains are being attacked through the pandemic for a lot of people, particularly those in factories. Interesting.
Yeah. So the team had an amazing idea. They thought about that, and I have to tell you, it wasn't easy to implement, but I was so proud. Our internal COEs, everybody who had to pull together to make it happen, they just jumped right in, right? They didn't question, they were like, yes, this is what we need to do. And so, being able to just make that possible, because there was that kind of shared empathy and enthusiasm for our frontline workers at General Mills to try to make life a little bit better for them, right? Or a lot of it better if we could, but better in any way that we could. So David, I'd love to cue up the video to share what we did, and then we can share what happened. It's just 90 seconds, and we sent this out the very first week of January.
David, let me pause you there. Your audio has to be on for the audio to come through the video. Just a little heads up. So you have to be unmuted.
Fantastic. You want to tell the story a little bit more?
Sure. So, really there was the opportunity to give the gift of choice is what we called it. And giving folks the opportunity to choose between a bonus, some time off, a day off, or to make a donation to a charity of their choice. And I'll tell you, it was very clear we were going to do either day or dollars. And it was really a leader on my team, Renee, who was like, we need three things. We need three things, Kristina. And I'm like, okay, well, what could the third thing be? And one of our strategies at General Mills is to be a force for good. And so, we've got a great culture of both contributions and volunteering in the community, in addition to the work that the company does and leads. But to add that element of donation, to be able to acknowledge that even if we're, our frontline folks are working their tails off, they do have families, friends, and neighbors who are struggling. And we know that, the number of people that, are suffering from food scarcity in this country is much more significant than we'd like it to be. And so the option to add the donation was probably the trickiest one for us to figure out how to make that work. But I think it was really worth it to have three things for folks to choose from, as well as it worked out well with our 3Ds of day, dollars, and donations.
No, it's nice. I think we've got a poll. We actually, before we show you the data that happened, we'd love to get a sense, like from this group, we've got 220 something people on. What would you choose if you were given the choice of paid time off, a cash bonus, or donation? What would you choose? And I can see you've worked out where the poll is, and we've got up to 70 people. Let's get a couple hundred people if we can. What would you choose? It'd be interesting to see the mix, and then we'll show you the data. And this was data from, Kristina, did you say about 10,000 people went through this? Is that right?
That's right. That's right.
10,000. Yeah, so it's a pretty meaningful set of data, 10,000 people.
I saw someone put in the chat a combination. Oh, we don't know how to do that. It was complicated enough to get three different choices.
Yeah.
I love that though.
We'll take lots of questions and comments in a minute or two. I just want to give you the sort of the meat of the experiment. All right, so we've got 176. We'll close that off in 3, 2, 1. Let's close it off. So what do we see here? So here we see 44% paid time off. I'm gonna write it down. 44, 26% cash bonus, and donation 31%. This is a very generous group.
Very altruistic.
Very altruistic. Were they? Yeah, interesting. So, so tell us what you discovered. We can compare that a little bit. Tell us what you discovered. Shall I go to the next slide?
Sure, and I'll tell you what I was guessing. So we had some hypotheses going into this, right? So as you mentioned, David, it was a bit of an experiment for us. And we had a hypothesis. I was personally in the 70 to 75%, I thought, would take a day off. So given what we'd seen on the fatigue assessments and, you know, at the beginning, it's the very beginning of the calendar year. So that's where we could add that day into their vacation bank and make that available and give people a little breathing room on their time off. So I thought it'd be more like 70, 75%, and was surprised that it came in at 59% who chose the day off, 39% with the bonus, and then 2%, so over 150 is almost 200 people chose to donate their bonus to charity, which was really cool. I also had my hypothesis. I thought more women would choose to take the day off than men, just given, you know, some of the things that we know about women being primary caregivers and families, et cetera. And I was wrong. More men chose the day off slightly. It was almost exactly the same.
Right.
I also thought I had a hypothesis that more employees who had less than 5 years would take the day off over the bonus or the donation. And I was wrong on that as well. So more people who had more than 5 years, they chose time off than the less than 5 years. But the nuance of that is I also guessed that more employees at our union sites would choose the time off because here we have more seniority rules in place and things versus rotating time, you know, rotating work schedules and time off and overtime. And in that case, we did see the more junior people taking more time off, as well as in our union plants, we saw more people choosing to take the time off. So those are some of my hypotheses, and I didn't get very many of them right, which just goes to show you, we got to let the people make their own choices, right? The employees to make their own choice about what's valuable to them.
I'm just thinking about if you'd gone with 75% and given 75% of people like the day off, you would have missed about 1,500 people. Like you would have given them the wrong thing, right?
Right.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's really hard to guess, whereas giving them the choice, amazing. Someone was asking about like, how did people receive the video and what was their feelings? And you've got the data here. There was high engagement. So 85% of employees took the survey to make the choice. So that's
right, which was huge for us. So we had an element in there. If you didn't make a choice, then you got the bonus. But 85% took the survey. We had previously experienced more in the 35% participation in surveys, et cetera, that we'd done via email. So for 85% to engage, that was huge. And we really, we made it a light touch with a video and an email from the plant manager. And that was, you know, some posted that up a couple places around the plant. So really word of mouth really got going on that for folks. And so they, you know, there's a lot of buzz. I'll show you some quotes actually.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. I think the quotes are great. And then we can talk a little bit about the science and kind of why this happened. And we can also take some questions from people.
So these are some of the things that we got back from folks. So, you know, really, it was really positive. It was palpable. Like people were debating which you're going to choose and why, and having those discussions. And it was great to just have people debate and discuss something that wasn't maybe so contentious, like what's going on in the rest of our world in that same time frame. And so having this as a kind of fun distraction, energy giving discussion about what option they'll take, and also how important it was for folks to have that choice of the day off. We've not done anything like that before, you know, to just randomly give folks an extra day off. And even you know, we had to go through our unions and in our union sites to see if it was okay to give folks that choice, right? Because the union is who gets to decide on behalf of the employees. And all of our unions signed up to say, yes, this is really cool. We see the value in it easily, and we want to have our, the workforce here participate in that. And I love this last quote, which is just, I think people were a little bit in shock that it was that wonderful surprise, and the appreciation was really strong. So it was overall a couple weeks, while people were making their choices, it was kind of the talk of the town.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I want to address that final point that, like, I'm still in shock. It's quite a big statement. And this is, and I think that I really appreciate and applaud you guys following the science of this, because we've always said with rewards and threats, right? Everything's a threat or reward, that the really strong ones are unexpected. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic was very unexpected, right? We were all in overwhelm for many, many, many weeks and months. If we have another one, it's going to be much less overwhelming. Because it's going to be much more expected. We know what to expect, right? So it'll be a whole different experience, having another one of these in, 5 years or 10 years, those who've lived through this one. And the same thing with rewards. So when you're expecting something to happen, like, well, I'm getting this bonus, it's not particularly rewarding. But when an unexpected reward happens, it really gets your attention. And there's been a whole lot of research on this around rewards, and they find that, like, a bonus, for example, is not actually intrinsically rewarding unless it's actually more than you expected, right? Or more than other people, that, like, literally you're comparing yourself to other people. Yeah. Or the other thing is, deeply fair, like righting a wrong in some way. Like, this is one of those three things. A bonus doesn't tend to have much intrinsic financial, like, reward value in terms of activation of the reward networks of the brain. Whereas something unexpected has a really big, big, big hit. And you can see that in people's quotes. But let's bring alive what I said before about the 3 points of reward. So the first thing is, when people are told that they've actually got this 3D choice, firstly, at that moment, they would have been like, wow, that's really brilliant. I feel really respected, appreciated, treated like an adult, and, given choice. So, when we're given choice that we didn't think we have, it's very intrinsically rewarding in any domain. So that at that point, and you heard that from some people. The second point is when they actually take the reward. So when they receive the money or they take the day off, like, at that point, it would be very rewarding because they'd chosen it. And there's research on this, that when you choose something, you actually value it much higher than when you're just kind of given it. So if you've got 2 tubs of ice cream, you choose one, you choose one, you actually enjoy it more because you've chosen it. Yeah. It activates a toward response in the brain, a reward response through the act of choosing. Then you've got the fact that the reward is actually the thing that you want the most. So, you've chosen the money because you actually want the money, or you've chosen the day off because you really want the day off. And so you're enjoying it. And then even reflecting back, it's really 4 points. Reflecting back on the whole experience, there's more reward. So the difference between just, giving everyone a day off, which would have annoyed a bunch of people, giving everyone money, which also would have annoyed a bunch of people, is that now you've actually got reward for a considerable amount of time and for a large amount. So there's a lot of research behind this, but I wanted to go to a few questions. And Kristina, I think you can see the questions as well. And we can start to dig into some of those, but feel free to put any questions or comments also from folks in the chat. We can start to address those, and then we'll dig into kind of some of the learnings in a minute. Any questions coming up that you want to address, Kristina?
Oh, I'm not as good as you at reading while I was listening to what you were saying. I did see some questions about engagement, and yeah, I will talk about that maybe on the learnings on the next page. I think I saw one comment that, $250 isn't super generous. I agree. And we had given much more generous bonuses previously in the pandemic. And we were getting into a point where, because of all of the additional capacity we were bringing on, and every case was getting more expensive, we did not have as big of a budget to go after this. And so the choice really was the part that I think people were shocked about, not the amount of the award at all. That wasn't anything that shocked folks.
And that's an interesting point, actually, is that you actually need less actual reward to get a bigger tonnage. And this is what we wrote about in the neuroscience of total rewards, is that you actually can really maximize the value you have. I mean, the number when you add it up, is still in the millions, but it's, so it actually adds up. And then when you add up the time off as well, that actually adds up tremendously in all sorts of ways. That adds up to probably much bigger even than the millions of cash. So, but you're getting a huge return for that money as well, which I think is really interesting. But I think it's this the act of giving people the choice was innately, intrinsically rewarding in many, many ways.
Yeah, and that's what we did want some element of surprise, right? Some element. I mean, honestly, you should see if I could like curate and pull together all of the appreciation notes. I mean, we were sending weekly notes out to the plants with, PowerPoint slides and thank yous from all sorts of leaders, from the consumers, quotes from them. We were sending out tons of communication. All of our plant managers made a, TikTok video, kind of passing the product around. And I mean, they did, the teams thought about every which way that they could say thank you. And we wanted to find another unique way to say thank you. And that's where the choice came in.
Yeah. And there's a couple of interesting comments and questions coming in. When someone was asking, is this similar to why forcing people into, say, a diversity program doesn't tend to work? And in fact, it's exactly the issue. We wrote a big piece on this. Maybe my team can put it in the chat, but we wrote a big piece in Strategy and Business called, is your diversity program making your company more biased? And it turns out when you take away the autonomy and say, you have to do this training program, people actually dig their heels in. It's not that they, that they don't just appreciate it. They actually fight now and actually may become more biased. And there's some pretty good research that mandatory, DEI programs can actually do some harm. Whereas giving people the choice is really, really different. And we've done quite a bit of research in that. And a couple other interesting questions coming up. Actually, it's a different article, not that one. That's a piece that someone just put in the chat. That's a different one. There you go. The S&B article I mentioned, that second chat from Gabe. Something else here I think it's important is, was it difficult, Kristina, to get the leaders on board with this, or were they driving it? You guys were kind of steering it, or, what was the experience with kind of getting this executed? And I know you did it really quickly too. How was that for you?
Yeah, we did go quickly. The leaders, I'd say, of the company overall, and for sure our manufacturing leaders, were eager to do something. And I think it's easy for all of us to fall into a bit of a paternalistic, like we know what's best. People are saying they're tired, let's give them time off, right? And so, but thankfully, we also have really thoughtful leaders who are willing to discuss and debate what some different options and opportunities could be for us. And that was, that your inspiration and talk was excellent timing for us to tee up this kind of an option in terms of unexpected autonomy. So they got to hear that directly from you. And then we could bring that back up in discussion without having to, go describe what that was. And this guy named Dr. Rock said, and blah, blah, blah.
We had some momentum there. Someone was asking about the number of choices, and 3 is actually a helpful number to think of. And the reason it's helpful is, 2 is not really a choice. It's like, A or B. It doesn't feel like a choice. Whereas 3, you can hold 3 variables in mind, unless they're really complicated each. You actually can hold 3 variables in mind reasonably well and compare and contrast them in our working memory. When you try to hold 4 things in mind and compare and contrast them, it actually starts to fall off the cliff of literally the resources we have for our working memory. And so it's hard to actually compare and contrast them. And once you get to 5, it's like almost impossible. So you can imagine 3 different scenarios and pick between them. And it really feels like a choice. Lisa Smith is saying 2 is a dilemma, 3 is a choice. It actually feels like you've been given a choice. Too many, and it actually is overwhelming. And there's quite a lot of research on that. Sheena Iyengar wrote a book on that, The Power of Choice. We had her at one of our summits some years back. But 3 is a good rule of thumb, just from working memory capacity. Do you want to go, Kristina, to some of the data, some of the lessons learned and some of the data on the next slide? I'm going to talk through some of this, and folks, put in any questions or comments as we come up, and then we'll start to kind of, blow it out a little bit as well.
Yeah, certainly. And we've talked about some of it for sure. And that, it really was the choice that was seen as a reward in itself.
Right.
And having that option. And so that was definitely really exciting to see, knowing that, that one solution doesn't fit for everybody, and you can't know everybody's personal situation to know what's going to fuel their own individual well-being or goals, or whatever, especially as you're talking about money or time, right? Or motivation. So definitely having that and thinking about it from that standpoint, that proved out to be true. I mentioned that our unions embraced it as well, and very easily and quickly. And it really stood out. So there were lots of companies who were, and people who we compete for talent with, in the different markets that were doing bonuses. And we were doing bonuses. This definitely was not the first one we did. And the option here of the choice was, again, just the part that was a bit the shock and the difference, and the opportunity in what we saw. I also, some new news. We just finished up an engagement survey. So I'd mentioned to you that our engagement results back in September, we'd seen some, dips and some of the fatigue showing up there. And we just finished an engagement survey last Friday, and I just got some of the raw data here this morning. And versus last year, we're seeing statistically significant increases in our engagement among this population and some of the important questions about proud to work for General Mills and a great place to work and feeling valued as an employee, and +4% and +5%. But on some of the ones from that pulse survey we did back in September about communicating authentically and openly, and the company caring about my well-being, we saw +8% and +9% for this population. So we're really encouraged about, and by this was not the only thing we did, right? So we had those fatigue assessments. We launched 9 sprints, plus this, we were doing a lot of work on communication. Our total rewards team completely revamped our well-being resources for January, as many companies have been doing, and as many great options have come available. And so there've been a lot. I mean, we've hosted vaccine events at almost all of our sites in North America, or will, or in the US, or will by the end of this month. And so we've got a lot of other things going on as well related to well-being, but nonetheless, that was the message we were trying to get through here: is choose something that's good for you, right? And choose something that's good for your well-being. So we're really encouraged with how we're seeing this show up in our engagement results as well.
No, that's great. Before we broaden it, any questions from the group, in the chat, from folks on the initiative or the design or anything like that? I can see one from Liz just come in. But just this is a good chance to kind of dig into this. Then we'll kind of broaden it out a little bit and talk about kind of what's next and other things. It's an interesting question. How did employees' families respond? The community, was this was it a topic? Did it, was it talked about? Do you want to take that one, Kristina?
Yeah, I don't have any intel on that, so I would guess. I would guess pretty positively, in that there was some buzz that folks were able to take home and to talk about with their friends and with their family. So we haven't checked their Facebook pages or anything for.
Yeah, there's an AI to do that, but it's a little intrusive at the time. And can you say more about the fatigue survey? So people are asking about kind of what you can share more about that, the pre and post, and how you did that, and what some of the questions were.
Yeah, so we were able to take a look at a few things, and so the team had pulled together some of the aspects that we knew were important. And so we had that recent engagement pulse survey, so taking a look at that. But we were also able to take a look at some of the practices, staffing practices in any given site, especially around where we were seeing more forced overtime, for example, overtime hours. For us, we have to take a look at it on a year-over-year basis, because we do have a good amount of seasonality in our business. So taking a look year-over-year, are we seeing higher levels of overtime worked, higher levels of where overtime is getting getting to the point of being forced, et cetera. Same with staffing, percent open jobs, for example. And then also looking at the business aspects of it. So added run days, I'm trying to think of what, some changes. So, you might imagine some of our businesses had an increase in production. Some of our business actually had a decrease in production in our food service business, or our Nature Valley snack bars, for example, where people weren't on the go as much. And so we actually pulled some of that production in from external manufacturing, but that meant more changeovers, and more changeovers can lead to more fatigue, types of things. So that was some of the things we were looking for and trying to identify of what were those stress factors that could be coming in and with those teams. If anyone had a specific question, I'd be happy to connect with them as well. Oh, David, I think you're on mute again.
Love that. One of the other interesting questions is like, of the different things of the charity issue, like were people told which charity to give to, or are they given choices? How many choices were they given in the charity? Like, was it pre-selected, or how did you do the charity choice?
Yeah, so we, as a company, we already offer, a match for employees in any given year, up to a certain amount that they would donate to charity. And we've got a site that we use where people can designate and make those donations. So as long as it's a 501c3, I think is the designation, we would, make that donation on their behalf.
Great, yeah. And someone is asking also, like, can you speak a little bit to how this kind of approach with, giving choice can be really impactful for blue collar or factory workers? Like, how is it even more relevant to them? Can you speak more to that? I know you addressed it a little bit, but can you say a little bit more about it?
Yeah, for our folks, they didn't really have a choice whether to show up to work or not, right? And already, the level of flexibility. So throughout the entire pandemic, we've had three themes that we've been focused on from HR, from an employee support standpoint: care, flexibility, and prioritization of work, right? And so if we're, keep working on those three things: care, making sure people are taken care of; flexibility, in whatever way we can give; and prioritization of work, making sure the most important things are clear and can get done. And the flexibility piece is much more difficult for folks where we need to cover every shift. We need to cover, we need a certain number of people to cover every shift. And so some of our plants have been able to do a terrific job of, really amping up where we allow shift swaps, where we allow people, to be doing trading and reorganizing work for their schedules, because these folks who are showing up at the plant every day, they also have kids that were not in school, right? They also have family members who they might need to take care of, and they didn't have that same flexibility as a lot of our folks who could work from home did. And so that would be, those would be some of the restrictions in terms of, where they have less autonomy overall, especially on their own time, right? Their own schedule. And if you're the most junior person and no one else wants to work on Saturday, you might have to be the one who shows up on Saturday. Right. And it only takes one person to not show up for us to not to be able to run production, right?
And I think we mentioned this before, but I think that as they compare themselves to folks in the office who don't have to leave their home at all and can maybe go and live with their parents and can, go and live in a ski field for a month or do whatever, like it can really start to look unfair. So I think this was specifically for the factory workers, and I think it's a powerful thing. Let's broaden it a little bit. There's also some other great questions coming in, and feel free to answer those. But let's broaden a little bit. Like, first of all, what are you thinking of next in terms of applying this principle? So the principle is giving people unexpected choice versus kind of defining, what they get. But not just for rewards, like across the whole, across the whole spectrum of talent resources, right? What are you thinking about doing next in terms of some of the systems that you have there?
Yeah, and this is where I'd love to tap into the audience who's participating today. We've got a couple areas where we're looking to do some focused improvement, if you will, where we know we have an opportunity to be stronger and to be better. I'm interested to know if others have used autonomy or choice in these spaces. So one of them is recognition, and especially peer recognition and creating that culture of recognition. So not just your manager recognizing you, but recognizing each other. The second is retention. And so I'm sure I'm not alone in struggling with retention. And for us, we struggle the most with our 0 to 12 month hires in our production teams. And so this is a space where we're also thinking about maybe relatedness as an opportunity to build more of a cohort status and relationship with each other and, with the rest of the organization. But trying to figure out both, I'd say, recognition and retention.
Right.
Are there opportunities for us to leverage autonomy, unexpected autonomy, or other aspects of SCARF for us to improve?
Right. Yeah. Recognition is kind of an obvious one, isn't it? Giving people more choice over the rewards. And I wrote about that a little bit in that paper, that you could also tweak your rewards based on people's SCARF profile. So if you knew that someone had relatedness as a really big profile, you're much less likely to just give them a cash bonus and more likely to do something that has them connect with other people. So you would serve up different kinds of rewards based on people's SCARF profiles. You still give them choice, still give them the autonomy, but you might give them a different 3 to choose from if you knew someone had relatedness versus someone had autonomy itself. So that's an area. Love to hear from the group. There's a couple hundred of you here. Where are some of the areas that you think organizations, General Mills and many organizations, could experiment with unexpected autonomy? Where are some of the areas within the talent framework do you think people could experiment? And I'll bring a couple of things up while folks get to work on the chat. We'd love to see your insights in the chat. One thing that we saw is obviously with the pandemic, people were given more choice over kind of, where they worked to some degree. They couldn't work at the office, so it meant they had some choice over where they work. But a really big variable, and I think we talked about this last week, is giving people more choice over when they work as well. And in any way you can give them even a tiny bit of unexpected reward over when they work, even if it's only 10% of their hours, it can make a huge difference. So you might say, hey, look, this is harder with factory workers, obviously, but there's still an element of it. But try to give unexpected rewards over when people work and give them a little bit more control. That's a very powerful one. We've got a few coming in: employee development opportunities, definitely. Expansion of skills, horizontal growth, instead of telling them which direction, like giving them more options. Cynthia's saying we implemented an online recognition portal where they wove some of this in. What else is coming in? Career, definitely. Upskilling time. Tommy from a public university saying there's not much autonomy, mostly top-down driven. Yeah, it's interesting, even the most positive change tends to get about 20 to 25% of people actively fighting it. So, and this is the no good deed goes unpunished principle, right? It's really hard to fight against being given a choice of different things, 3 good things. You probably will get some people who are annoyed, but I guess that's a question for you, Kristina. Was anyone annoyed by this? Did you get punished for doing this by anyone that you heard of?
I'm sure there was a person or two, right? It didn't make it to my inbox if it was, right. But yeah, I have to imagine, right? There's somebody who could could be disappointed or frustrated about something.
For sure. But I think you can really take this apart. Like, let's think about performance management, for example, like the goal cycle. Should everyone be on the same goal cycle? Should some people be on a goal cycle that's a month or 3 months or 6 months, depending on. So, should there be some flexibility in the goal cycle that you work with? Should there be some flexibility of how you debrief? Do you always have to debrief with your manager, or should be able to invite other people to debrief, to broaden and provide more input and reduce bias in there as well. So if you kind of think about all the different points, say on the performance cycle, from setting goals to doing check-ins to even end of year, there's actually some unexpected autonomy could be woven in there, which could be very, very powerful. Certainly you think about learning and development, there's some improvements in the broad space around that for sure, but with more kind of pathways and self-driven work. But I think it's also overwhelmed. So there's also like 1,000 courses you can do versus look, here are 3 pathways and let's help you choose one. So I think we've gone overboard with the autonomy in the online learning space a little bit, thrown out certainty, gone too far. Whereas giving people some clear pathways and kind of choose a learning pathway and maybe choose 3 would be fantastic. Anything else coming up? So upskilling's coming up quite a bit. So giving people a lot more autonomy over there. Yeah, and Revathi's saying we have unexpected autonomy in the performance process. Some people find it hard to cope with. It is possible to give people too many choices. And some people, if they have certainty as a high function, are going to want a lot of certainty. They don't want as much autonomy. Other people, generally more senior, tend to like a lot more autonomy. Generally, and it's not a fixed thing, but generally the higher you go in an organization, the more people want autonomy. So if you're talking about functional leaders or regional leaders or country managers, this kind of thing, you're going to want to weave autonomy in as much as possible, because it will actually be one of their strong scarf drivers. So lots of great questions coming in. Anything, Kristina, anything that you want to share in terms of the sort of big lessons learned and kind of as we wrap this up, the big lesson learned from your perspective? You followed the science, you experimented, you followed the data. What's the biggest insight for you out of the whole process?
Yeah, I think I think there's a piece of the power of choice, right? And I really like what I learned today from you about someone who wrote in 2 is a dilemma, 3 is a choice. I'm like, right. That is really powerful. I got to remember that. And credit to Renee on my team for seeing that opportunity as well. And I think that the other piece is, one of the things that we're constantly thinking about is how do we accelerate possibilities? So I think a year ago, 2 years ago, we would have said, oh, we just can't do that, right? Just can't, that too hard, too complicated, too something, right? And I think that the idea, in fact, we did, and we were scrappy in terms of how we did the survey and how we pulled things together. But, I think just about anything's possible. And if you can follow the science, you have more confidence that your experiment, right, is going to have elements of success and elements of learning right. that you can build upon. And so I think for us, being able to accelerate possibilities is another piece right. that, we're proud of and we're glad that we pushed on.
The big insight for me is that choice is intrinsically or unexpected choice is intrinsically and powerfully rewarding as long as it's the right amount of choice. So not an overwhelming amount. So the right amount of unexpected choice is intrinsically and unexpectedly rewarding and powerful. And I know you really helped 10,000 people, and no doubt their families and others in a small but actually meaningful way. In ways that showed up in your engagement figures. So hats off to you. I look forward to watching the next experiment that you do. I'm sure we'll have some conversations about some fun experiments. Maybe it'll be learning, maybe it'll be performance, could be anywhere. Folks, just as we wrap up, we're going to put a poll up in terms of knowing how to follow up with you best. So just as we say thank you to Kristina, see if you can, before you jump off, see if you can click one of those things and we know how to follow up with you. Kristina, just a huge thank you for the collaboration, the partnership, and being willing to jump into this and share the data and share the story. I know you've inspired a ton of people here. There'll be many, many thousands listening to the podcast later. I'm sure will be inspired as well.